at worst, it's a Luke and Leia moment, but at best, it's like a, hey, I'm going to help you get out of this sticky situation.
Yeah. And in the end, they're not brother or sister or anything like that. So if
Yeah,
they kissed, whatever.
yeah,
I mean,
it still
it's
work out.
yeah, it's just weird because
Yeah,
then she's kissing his daughter's husband, but whatever, it's 2000s. People do weird things. Who knows?
yeah, and she's hot. So.
What's up, my nerd?
Welcome everyone to the Credible Nerds podcast. My name is Justin, and once again, we are here to talk more about Lord of the Rings / Rings of Power / Middle Earth. We have discussed the Rings of Power Season 1 previously. If you want to go back and listen to that podcast, we divided it into two separate parts, part 1, part 2. And that was before we were doing video, so you'll have to listen to it on your device and go old school, I guess. So, but yeah, and we've also done The Hobbit. We did a review series for each one of those movies. And now we're here doing Rings of Power Season 2. And as always, I have my fellow Ishtari with me. Mark, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going? Good to be here. I'm doing good.
Awesome. So, like I said, we've been talking Lord of the Rings type stuff. We've been talking Lord of the Ring type stuff for a while. And we're here with Season 2. We instead of breaking it into two parts, we've decided just to wait till the end of the season and talk about it and give our thoughts and just go from there. So as far as you go, Mark, comparing this season 2 to Season 1, how do you feel they compare, or do they compare? Are they two different things? And it's just, you can't.
No, I think it's comparable because we're introduced, right, in Season 1, we're kind of introduced to the whole world, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking all pre-Lord of the Rings, stuff by quite a bit. I mean, this is, I think, Second Age going into the Third Age, end of the Second, first of the Third Age. And so we're introduced to some characters we know, some characters that we've heard of but haven't seen much of, and characters we have no idea. And that's Season 1. Season 2, we kind of expound on that, and we dive deeper into Sauron, who he is, what his motivations are, how he gets the rings done and they're made, so we get a lot of that. So it really builds on Season 1. So they're pretty well connected. Like, I don't think you can watch Season 2 and skip Season 1, but I think it was better than Season 1 in the long run.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It'd be hard to watch Season 2 without Season 1, and Season 2 is definitely better because we have all those established storylines, characters like you were talking about. And so we can move on and just get into, what's happening in this age of Middle Earth. And so I really enjoyed that. I think Season 3 should be even better because we have these already even more established characters, fleshed out storylines, and I think it just builds and builds and builds. I think they were talking like six or 7 seasons ultimately is what they want to do. Whether or not we get that, we'll see. But Season 3 has been greenlit. It's been approved. I don't know where they're at in the pre-production process, but it's on its way. Probably get it in a couple of years based on the streaming services model and how they produce shows. It usually takes a couple of years, which is fine. I mean, because that's how long movies usually take, 2-3 years. And these are basically, it's basically a long movie, 2-part movie or so. So, but yeah, I think overall it's better, a better show than Season 1. Not that Season 1 was bad, but so it kind of set the stage. In the first season, we got a prequel, or not a prequel necessarily, but a pre-showing of Galadriel and what she's up to, and then we kind of catch up to the beginning of the main story. We did that same thing here in this season, where we had a flashback. That's the word I'm looking for. Flashback of Sauron and how he came to be in the Second Age. And it starts off with he's Morgoth is dead. And so there's a vacuum of power, and he's one of the apprentices, I guess, of Morgoth. And so he's trying to step into that role and take control. But there's a group that doesn't like him. They don't want him to rule. Adar and his group, the Uruks. And so they end up killing him. And I think it was with Morgoth's crown is how they killed him. and then, well, started to, and then they just kind of beat him up until he died. And then his essence oozed out, and then thousands of years later, he's able to reform, and the story starts up kind of where we left off in season 1. What do you think of that origin, kind of that flashback of Sauron and how we get to see that part of it?
I liked it because I think it rounds up a hole that was in the story, right? Because
Yeah.
we see in season 1 that Sauron is Halbrand, a big, that's a spoiler alert if you've never seen season 1, but he's Halbrand, and you kind of wonder, like, well, why is he here? What's he doing? Like, where's his orc armies, et cetera, et cetera. And we kind of get a little glimpse, some hints, between when Adar and Halbrand kind of interact, that something happened there. And so this really, explained that. Kind of one of the things that may not have explained very well is how he's able to come back. And he's able to come back because he's not elven, he's not human, he's Maiar. How do you say it? Maiar?
Yeah, I don't know. Maiar.
Yeah,
M-A-I.
Maiar.
M-A-I-A-R, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, so he's Maya. It's
Maya.
kind of a race of angelic beings, and so he's immortal, and so he's able to come back over time. But it was cool to see kind of his fallout with the orcs, and through this series, see his motivations on how, yes, orcs are important. Like, we understand the need for armies, but it's just like Galadriel said in one of the episodes, right? It's not armies he needs, it's rings.
Yeah.
Right. And really kind of showed he needs rings of power. And so that was interesting to me because it showed that his motivations were beyond amassing a lot of people and power and followers. His idea is, no, I want rings of power to control all the masses. I don't need loyal servants. I need something to make them loyal. That way no one can ever betray me.
Yeah. That's some good points there. I like it. So this initial scene, I guess, this flashback started at the beginning of the Second Age, and then it jumps forward. I don't know how many thousands of years, hundreds of years, but it's at least in the middle of the Second Age is the feeling I'm getting, if not later in the Second Age. But so it's set way before the Lord of the Rings movies, novels, etc. And it depicts the rise of the Dark Lord Sauron and his plan to deceive the elves into creating more rings of power they can use to dominate the free peoples of Middle-earth, just like you said. And then this season builds up to the climactic siege of Eregion.
Yeah.
Eregion. Okay.
Yes.
So, at the end of the first season, the final episode, probably one of the final scenes, is they create the rings of power, the 3 for the elves. So that's start of the season 2. That's established, and they're working on rings of power for the dwarves, and then later on in the season for men, the 9 rings for men. So I think there was 8 episodes for this season. And
yeah, I think you're right. I think there was 8. Yeah.
So we got enough content to have a good story. Do you feel like 8 episodes? I never feel like there's enough episodes. I mean, we grew up watching shows back in the 80s, 90s, 2000, early 2000s where there was 20 episodes a season, right? And that was a thing until one of the writer strikes in like 2007 or something like that. And they had a shortened season. And then ever since then, it's been like 20, 15, 12. And now with streaming, it's like the standard's 8, I think. So for me, there's never enough story. But with 8, do we feel like this is enough time spent to flesh out this season?
Yes and no. I think yes. I mean, that, and really you get 6 to 8 hours of show, somewhere in there. Not every episode's an hour long. Some are a little longer. Some are, 40 minutes. So somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. that is a long time, so I can think you can do a lot with it. But when you're talking about a world as expansive as, um, Lord of the Rings, this entire story spanning, I don't know, tens of thousands of years,
Yeah.
it's impossible to get everything in. So even though we got 6 to 8 hours, which is a long time, we see a lot of things condensed, right? One of the big um, complaints is that the storylines are messed up, right? We've got the Balrog Durin's Bane, is what they call it. We see that Balrog actually in Lord of the Rings. We see that thrown in, and the timeline doesn't quite match when Durin's Bane would have happened, but they have to bring that story in somehow, and you can't in 8 episodes or 3 seasons span 2,500 years of history with the dwarves and the elves and everything else. I mean, it'd be, season 56, here's Dern's Bane.
Yeah.
So um, I think it's good because it allows us to tell a really complete and fleshed out story. But in something like this, it doesn't feel like enough because we're both avid readers. We both know the general storyline kind of when things happen. And so for us, we see this get thrown in to condense the story. And we're like, oh, that's wrong. Like, they must hate Lord of the Rings. Let's go and try. Right. So, yes and
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you there because I don't like filler episodes, and it's easy to recognize them. But I do feel like I would like maybe 10 episodes a season or something where you can fill in the more content. But like you said, I think there's two big complaints, standard complaints that stood out to me with this show as a whole is the timelines don't match up, just like you described. And I think with novel to TV movie adaptations, you have to condense, you have to do something. It has to be a little different, streamline it better. Like, what's the show? Ready Player One is a perfect example of that. The book is amazing, but it's like a long period of time. And so in the movie, they condensed a lot of it together to happen shorter. And it kind of messed up a little bit, but you had to do it. There's no way you could stay true to the book and have a 2.5 hour movie with it. And this is kind of the same concept. There's just not enough time. You'd have, like you said, 56 seasons or whatever. So there's that complaint, which I agree with, but I also understand it. And I do think it's necessary to streamline it more. The other complaint is that there's just too many storylines. You got Numenor, you got not only Numenor, but then you also got, is it Elendil?
Yeah. And the Isildur.
Isildur, yeah. And you got the dad on the island of Numenor. You got the son on the main continent of Middle Earth. And then you got Galadriel and Elrond, and then you got the orcs and Adar, and then you got the villagers and the one elf who's kind of the outlier who's helping the humans, and there's just so many storylines, and it's kind of too much. I mean, I like it, and that's why I wish there was maybe 10 episodes, because then you could address all those storylines more. But since we don't, it seems kind of a little too much content.
Yeah, I think his name's Arendor or something.
Yeah,
Arendor,
something like that.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what people need to recognize is, so we have the Lord of the Rings books. We have the Hobbit book. Those are pretty fleshed out books. I mean, we're telling a specific story. If you're not a reader, you're not a fan of the series, what you don't realize is that the rest of this, first, second age, some of the stuff that happened in the third age, there was multiple books printed that talked about pieces of this. The main, most popular one, the Silmarillion.
Mm-hmm.
It has some great stories in there. I suggest reading it. There's multiple other books that this pulls from. And so what's happening is they're taking all these storylines from all these books and trying to timeline it into this nice, concise story. So you have a lot of storyline, right?
Yeah.
This is a huge world, right? I mean, and so you have different people doing different things, the Numenorians. If you never watched past Lord of the Rings, it very quickly mentions it, I think, in the Two Towers, right? Where the Aragorn is a Numenorian, and then that's why he lives. That's why he's so old, right? And he fought with Theoden's father, etc. And so we talk about the Numenorians, who they are, where they came from, etc., like that. And then we talk about, different groups, wizards and stuff. There's all this going on in this big, expansive world, and they all exist in other books. So now we got to make a nice long movie of it. So they're pulling all these stories to make a really good show. And yeah, I get, like, sometimes I watch it and, like, I remember some of the episodes, like, I don't care about this. I want to know about, what's happening to so and so or whatever it is. And you know what? Like, it's annoying, but I've read books like that. I think,
that's true.
Take Robert Jordan. He wrote like that a lot. Like, he would write 200 pages about awesome storylines, and I get to read about, some character walking through the snow, and I'm like, I don't care about this stuff, But in the end, it was a really good story. So it's just getting through the process. Like, it's all going to start pulling together. The storylines are going to come together. You'll appreciate this big, expansive, deep story in the end, but you got to stick with it to get there.
Yeah, that's a very good point. All right, so we have a couple topics we want to get into, some of our favorites, things we liked about this season. I'll start off. The first one is Celebrimbor and Sauron, how they were working together. If you read that line just in and of itself, you're like, what? Sauron, he's the Dark Lord, and he's working with Celebrimbor, an elf, and what's going on? But he came to, last season he was disguised as Halbrand, a fallen, lost king or something like that. But he shows up in this season disguised in that same disguise, but then he's kind of, Galadriel had warned them, don't talk to this guy, he's Sauron. So they didn't meet with him. But he came back disguised as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. And they work together, and he's an elf, Anatar's appearance of an elf. And they work together to make the rings of power for the dwarves and man. And that was one of the things that is from the novels, is how Sauron would go around disguised as, in disguise, deceiving all the different races, different peoples and stuff like that. So that's, directly influenced from Tolkien's works. But I thought that whole dynamic there between those two, he comes across as like very likable. Everyone is on board with him, and they work on the rings for the dwarves. But as time goes on, Celebrimbor starts to pick up on things. At one point, he's caught in this like time loop type thing where there's this full-on siege going on in his city that he's in charge of, and he's not aware of it because Sauron's power to make him see that, the ring's fine. You just need to keep working, and it's no big deal. But he finally sees through that as he's making the rings for men. But that whole dynamic there between those two, I thought was really well done, and it was very enjoyable to watch. What are your thoughts on kind of Sauron as in disguise working with Celebrimbor?
So I really liked it. So we kind of get this weird perception, especially in Lord of the Rings and stuff, that the elves are like infallible.
Yeah.
Right? They are above and beyond. And yeah, they live forever. And so, they're generally better fighters because they practice for thousands of years. They're generally smarter because they study for thousands of years. But, I mean, they have weaknesses just like us. And I think this was really cool at showing Celebrimbor's weaknesses.
Yeah.
His need to be equal or better than Fëanor, right? Yeah. His need to have his name written in the histories, like it's no longer the works of Fëanor, it's now the works of Celebrimbor, so his pride drives him. So there's times throughout this season that you can see that he's like, something's a little off here. Yeah. But then you have Sauron, Anatar, that feeds into that, he builds that pride up, and he completely loses his brains and looks past all the red flags, right? And keeps going, and it's a train wreck in slow motion that we're watching. And, he just keeps going, and all his workers are like, what is this guy, And so then Anatar convinces to kick him out, all based on his pride. And by the time he realizes that, oh my gosh, like, this is what's going on, his pride had taken him way too far. It was over. He'd already been, the ruse had happened, and now all he can do is watch.
Yeah.
And it was unfortunate. It was a really I mean, it was brilliantly made
Yeah.
how that all worked, and I really loved it. But man, I sure felt for him too.
Yeah. Yeah, because he was working both. Sauron was working both sides, working Celebrimbor mostly, but then all his helpers, he'd be like, "Hey, he's a little crazy. Don't listen to him," kind of deceiving them. So when he finally
Mm-hmm.
broke through the mirage or whatever it was, the spell, magic spell, he was like, "No, it's him. He's the bad guy," and everyone's like, "What? No, you're crazy." So no one believed him at that point. So like you said, you feel for him. It was brilliantly acted. The guy that plays Celebrimbor was awesome. He did great. I've always liked
Mm-hmm.
the guy that plays Sauron / Halbrand / Anatar. I think he's great. The first season he's all scruffy and dirty, and then this season he's all nice with blonde hair, looking very elvish, and it's the same actor. You're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
he's deceiving even me, because there were times in the beginning I was like, no, that's a different guy. That's a different actor, but it was the same guy.
Mm-hmm.
So very well done, very well acted, written, all that stuff. So that was probably my favorite storyline of the series was that one. So
Yeah,
so they make
definitely.
the rings for the dwarves. We see the effect that it has on them, and then the kind of the harder part, I guess, was convincing Celebrimbor to make the rings for men, and he didn't want to do it. And then, like you said, he played on his pride, and he's like, "Okay, yeah, I'll do it." And then we don't really see the rings delivered to the two men, just that the rings are made, and there's some battle over it. So I imagine that's what we'll see next season, is the rings delivered to the kings of men.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel like, my question was, I bought into the making of the rings. I bought into the elves and the dwarves wanting to wear the rings. I was a little confused about the power of the ring. Like, okay, I understand it gives them power, but how? Like, is the power in the ring? Do they access the power like in, like you mentioned earlier, Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, where it's like this essence that they have to tap into somehow? Like, where does the power come from, and what is that power, really? And how is it made? Like, where does it come from?
They kind of talked about this a little bit the in the making of the rings with Anatar, and um, they talked about like the flaw of the Dwarven rings, and because Celebrimbor made them with greed in his heart, they made the dwarves greedy. That's not actually true. So in these rings are given the power to rule the people and stuff like that. Now we knew that dwarves were great miners, and they were always mining for gold, and that was kind of their ambition. As we want to mine, we want to. So the dwarves were created by the Valar, and the Valar that created them was like the Valar of, I don't know, creation, like mining gold and la la, like that kind of stuff. And so they had this ambition. That was their ambitions. So what the rings did, it gave them the ability to rule. And we saw that when Durin wore the finger. He was able to lead the people and had power to, like, they had that big cave in, and he had the power to tell you, go here, go here. We're gonna open this up. But because that was their ambitions, to do that, it fed on those ambitions. And so the greed, the need to find more gold, the need to find and create things, and yada yada yada, and the distrust of elves grew.
Hmm.
It was magnified with that, which is why all of a sudden he was really greedy, digging for more gold. We saw that in The Hobbit, right, with the grandfather of or King Thror, right? So we saw that there, and with the rings of, with men. Well, men, as we know ourselves, are quite, just in general, the need for power, the need to dominate, the need to. So that's the kind of what it did for them. Now, with and we don't really know why, and it could just be how they created, which obviously it is. But the elves, those three rings were the only rings that were made without the influence of Sauron. And because of that, they didn't necessarily have that weakness. There's some, I don't know, a lot of back and forth on whether Sauron could actually control the elves with the rings. Some say yes, some say no. I think the book is kind of like a little bit wish-washy. Maybe, fact check me here because I could be way wrong. But I know that the elves' rings were not tainted by Sauron. The rest were, which is why it fed on those things and kind of put them beyond control. The only loophole I see out of this whole thing, especially with the dwarves, is that we see Durin watch his father run into this, right? We see his father just go into madness. His son's like, please take it off. He won't take it off. But they still have all the rings. So how did the rings get handed out with him knowing of this weakness? And so it'll be interesting to see if that's answered in season 3. But I thought that was a big plot hole. Like, no dwarf in their right mind would ever hand these out at this point.
Yeah, especially during the fourth, after watching it, the effect it had on his dad.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, in this show, they made a big deal about the mithril being part of the smithing process, the creation of the rings. And the mithril is found in the dwarven mines, and it's an effect of the love story that was explained in season 1 of like the trees reach, that whole thing. Is that where the magic, power, whatever comes from? Is from the mithril and that whole story? Or
it could no. I think that led to the indestructibility of them, like they couldn't be destroyed easily without dragon fire and things like that. Because mithril's like it has something to do with the Silmarils and how they were created and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of a weird story. I haven't really dived deep into that.
yeah.
But I don't necessarily think that's how that had anything to do with it, but it could, right? I don't 100% understand it all myself.
All right. Yeah, we'll get into that later. I think this year for me has been a year of Sanderson. Like I've read all the Cosmere books in preparation for this next book coming out. And I think next year is going to be the year of Tolkien for me, where I'm going to buckle down, read everything, watch everything, and just get, that in line. Because I've read this, I read that, but I've never been like sat down and just consumed it. So I feel like I need to do that next year. But anyway. So the next segment kind of leads into, we talked about you mentioned the elves and how they use their rings. It has less power from Sauron, or maybe even no power for them, but they still recognize the danger. Elrond does, at least. He's like, we can't use these. It's going to create a lot of problems for us. But Galadriel and Gil-galad, they're like, oh yeah, this is what we need, because it restored their the tree and their life essence necessary, so they didn't have to leave Middle Earth at that point. And so they saw the benefits from it. Elrond saw the negatives. And so there's some, discussions there. Versus who we just talked about, the dwarves, who they want to use it. King Durin III uses his ring a lot to become basically the head king, right? And have this control over the rest of the dwarven nations, and also to find more wealth, find more mithril. So I thought that was a good comparison of like, hey, this is the elves and how they react to it, and this is the dwarves and how they're reacting to it, and they're two different things, which is kind of pretty consistent throughout the Middle Earth storylines. Is the elves are this way, the dwarves are this way, and that leads to a lot of their animosity that they have with each other throughout the stories. So I don't know, do you feel like Elrond is right? Or do you feel like Galadriel's right, like as far as their desire to use the rings?
I think, and this is where I kind of get annoyed with the show. I think that Elrond is super flawed, and I get that he's young and younger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really weird. He goes to Círdain, or Círdain, however you say it, and asks for his advice. I trust you. You're the oldest one here, because he was the oldest elf on Middle Earth. you're wise. Please tell us. And then he's like, oh, we should trust it. It's great. It's great. And then Elrond's like, well, F you, I'm gonna just think whatever I want.
Yeah.
And so that bugged me because why, you trust this guy and then he's telling you it's good and you don't believe him. And so I didn't like that. I think he's right to distrust it, knowing who was involved. Sauron, right? Now, obviously, I think he thinks that Sauron had more in a hand in making him than he actually did. And the reason this gets a little weird is because in the books, those 3 rings are made last, not first. And they are made after Anatar is discovered and pushed out. And so all the elves involved at the time would have known that Sauron had nothing to do with it. But the way that this put it, it's left questionable. How much did he have to put in? So I think the way the show has done it, it makes sense that he is so sketchy about it. But I also think it's silly because he is literally ignoring everyone he knows. He trusts Galadriel.
Yeah.
They're really good friends. They've known each other thousands of years. You know what? I know all of a sudden don't value your opinion. You're silly because you're using this.
Yeah.
He serves Gil-galad, who's been the king for a long time. He trusts him. He's literally his right-hand man. You know what? Screw you, Gil-galad. You don't know what you're talking about, right? So he literally just turns his back and it just looks silly and I don't like that.
Yeah.
It kind of is it's a downer for me. He's just like a naysayer,
Yeah. Yeah, and I can see that now that you're explaining that. It's I had picked up on that maybe unconsciously or not really that big of a deal for me, but now that you're explaining and I don't like Elrond, this portrayal of Elrond. Not only I think the actor looks kind of weird, kind of funky, which usually isn't a big deal, but I don't know. I just you think of Elrond and the elves and they're very majestic, kind of like what's his name was in the movies. As well as Legolas, I kind of expect that look, and he doesn't look like that. So the look is off for me. And then you're mentioning these things where he's like, "Hey, these are my friends and people I trust the most, but I don't value their opinion." So I just don't like Elrond's portrayal in this series so far. So I hope they have a good redemption arc for him coming up in a future season. But
I think it's Hugo Weaving.
Yeah, Hugo Weaving
plays him. And he just plays this majestic character, above and beyond our world to comprehend his character. And then we see him here, and he's like this politician kick boy. You know what I mean? It's go get this, go get that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
it's not matching well with me. I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we'll see what happens with him. And then. So there's that. I think it's obviously called the Rings of Power. And so I think the elves should be heavily involved. And they're one of my favorite storylines. I think last season I really liked the dwarven storyline as well as the Numenor storyline. But in this season, I'm more liking the elven storylines. And probably the Numenor is my least favorite because I don't know. Not much really happened, right? It's just... With the Numenorians, the queen got overthrown. The bad guys are taking over and getting rid of all the patriots, I guess you could say, the people true to the old king who died. So I don't know. It's stuff's happening, but it's not that interesting really at the end of the day. For me anyway. So I was disappointed in that. But yeah, the Elven storyline with the rings, making the rings, that whole thing I thought was really good. So.
Yeah, it's the Queen Muriel, right?
Yeah. And I like Elendil and Isildur and all that. So I'm pretty sure we'll see more of them. Maybe not next season. I don't know, because I still think they're still trying to flesh that whole thing out. Obviously, that whole thing's gonna come crashing down at some point, but I think that's season 4, season 5 is that kind of where that storyline comes front and center, but we'll see.
So there's a couple of weird history things here. So the reason that I liked it is it introduced Ar Pharazôn. Right, he's the one that kind of he's the one that kind of leads a coup against
Yeah.
her and takes over, with the weird bird thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't get that.
Yeah.
Well, I got it, but I didn't get why it was so significant.
Yeah, we don't know either. I've got some theories in my head, but
Okay.
anyways, and I think it has to do with some old writings. Real quick, throw this in there. Tolkien originally wrote the Great Eagles to be Maier, who came to Middle Earth and decided to be eagles, manifested as eagles. He afterwards changed that and just made them really big eagles that were smarter than other eagles and could talk. I don't know. So I almost feel like it went more the route that they're Maier, and so that their approval of a king or a queen as angelic beings was like a nod from the Valar that this person should be the right ruler. That's what I think.
That makes
they
more
kind of
sense.
went that route.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that's that's like deep history, like notes from Tolkien after he died to his son,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay.
But I liked it introduced our fair zone, because if you've read the story of Numenor, I don't want to ruin what's probably going to happen in season 3 with the big wave. Everyone sees the big wave, and they're seeing the future.
Yeah.
It has to do with that and what fair zone does to cause such a incident. So I like that it introduced him, because now I'm like, okay, I know what's going on. I know where this is going.
Yeah.
And you can see through his actions where it's going.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was the story for Numenor this season, was like the setup for what's coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, and I think out of all the storylines, that's the one I'm most interested in, is the Numenorians, and kind of how what goes on there, and how we end up with Isildur, and where he ends up with, the ring at some point. So, good stuff. The one storyline that I'm still waiting to be like drawn into and be like, yeah, this is awesome, because it has the potential, is the whole the Stranger storyline. This season we got the Stranger. At the end of last season, him and Nori left to go find the stars, or to find his name or whatever. And in this season they're doing that. Poppy shows up to help him out. And they're going to the land of Rune, which is awesome. That's always been on the map, on the boonies, and nothing ever happens there in the main books. So it's cool that we're headed there, and they're trying to find the stars that are strange, because that's where he's going to find his staff. And it's kind of a letdown. I thought last season's take on the Stranger storyline was a little better than this one. This one is they're just kind of walking, and then they get separated. The bad guys are chasing them, and I don't know, it's kind of weird. But the Stranger eventually runs into Tom Bombadil, and that was a big thing for this season, because the first time we ever see him on live action, and they talk. Tom Bombadil is kind of a Yoda figure in this season, kind of giving him some advice, but not really telling him what to do. Just like, hey, look within, and you'll figure it out. You got to do it. So, that's kind of how I see him. He can't really directly influence events, but he can help as needed, has kind of always been my take on him. So what do you think about Tom Bombadil and what he does with the Stranger, and kind of that whole piece for season 2?
It doesn't match what we actually know of Tom Bombadil. Quick thing, nobody knows who or what Tom Bombadil is. That's just what he's known as right now. We know him as that through the Third Age into the Fourth Age. That's it. We don't know where he comes from. We don't know. He calls himself Eldest, but we don't know anything. Maybe he's the creator. Maybe he's, just the twin brother of the creator. We don't know. He's around. He never takes a stance against the Dark Lord in Lord of the Rings. He could care less. He touches the ring. It has no effect on him. He tosses it over. He's like, okay, what's this? The ring obviously affects everybody else. He doesn't give it a second thought. But he doesn't take a stance against it either. He's, I don't think it mattered to him one way or the other who won the war. He was going to exist
Yep.
whether Sauron wins or not. And I fully believe Sauron knew who he, like, not necessarily who he was, but I believe he knew he existed and that
he's aware of him.
Yeah, he'll exist regardless or not, but he's not going to make any moves against him, and and life will go on. So, that's the one thing I didn't like, is I don't think it really held, like, in this one, it was like, oh, you need to make a move. I can't make the move for whatever reason. But, I need to get you ready to make a move and protect the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because I don't think he actually cared on that level. Maybe he would, like, help him if the stranger was starving to death, to give him some food and send him on his way. But I don't think he actually was like, I'm going to help you to save the world. I think in reality, the Tom Bombadil that we've read about would be like, oh, well, good luck one way or the other, don't get eaten by a tree on your way out, So I don't know. That was kind of weird. It was a cool story and how they put it in, and I like the wisdom he brought. But it was just kind of a weird, like, 4-episode arc that I don't think did a whole lot for me. It may have done more for others, but not for me.
Do you think it was fan service because we didn't get to see him in the Lord of the Rings movies?
Yeah, 100%. I think Tom Bombadil was one of the letdowns we didn't see in Lord of the Rings. So it was cool to see him here. But I don't think he really does a whole lot for the story. I think you could have done that. I think you could have done that arc with the stranger in a different way and still got to the ending you wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good point. So I did like the look of him. I thought it was pretty true to what the drawings we've seen on the books anyway. So yeah, it was fine. Well, he does give him hints he's got to find his staff, find his name, which he does. But the stranger confronts the Dark Wizard, or the Dark Wizard tracks him down. I can't remember the order of it, but they meet. And there was a lot of speculation. The Dark Wizard's Saruman. I don't think he is. Did we predict last season that the stranger was Gandalf, or that he was someone else? I can't remember.
I'm gonna lose my mind over this. In the books, the stranger character would not be Gandalf,
Right?
Or Grand Elf. Oh my
Grand
gosh!
Elf. Yeah. when they said that, I was like, what? He's not an elf.
I know. So I was watching that, and as soon as they said that, I was just like, no, because I knew, right?
Yeah.
It ruined it for me. So in the books, and I can't remember how canon this is, or if this is one of those weird writings that the son added in after, or whatever, but I'm 90% sure that wizards did go to come to Earth in the Second Age, but they were the blue wizards. They were not any of the other, the gray, the white, the brown, whatever else. They were the blue wizards, the same blue wizards that are mentioned in The Hobbit. When he couldn't remember their name, and he's like, oh, there's the two blueses. I can't remember their names. Those two same blue wizards showed up in the Second Age. And that's who the Istari are at that time.
Yeah.
And so to make them Gandalf, and I'm wondering if it's a rights issue, like, what books they have the rights to, what books they don't have the rights to. So it's like, they might not have the rights to the blue wizards, which is why they couldn't name them in The Hobbit. He just said, I can't remember their name. There's a rights issue. So you have to go with somebody to make it Gandalf, and to make it probably Saruman is who I imagine. I think is a cheap, silly way to make that happen, because Gandalf would, and I'm sure they did it because it's like in the book, Gandalf has such a liking to the hobbits, and this is a way to tie that in together. Oh, cool. He's known them for thousands of years. but that's just not reality. It's not the book, and that's probably the one veer away from the story that I absolutely hated. I thought it was a cheap way to do it. I make him any other Istari, make him any other Maiar or whatever. That way to do it is it. It ruined it for me. It ruined it for me. I hate it. I'm gonna watch next season because the show was amazing, but I just hated it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we did talk about it being the Blue Wizards. Now that you bring that up, that he was a Blue Wizard, and I don't like it either. What if it's a feint? What if it's like after, because that was like the last scene of the show, right? It's like, oh, Gandalf, and then it was over pretty much. At least his storyline was over. So is that gonna? He's like, we pick up season 3. He's like, nah, that's not who I am. Or something like that. I mean, could it be a setup? And he's actually not. I think that's just as stupid, but it could be. I don't know.
Yeah, it definitely could be, and there could be more that they tie in there together. I hope they do it in some way that makes sense and isn't just like, ah, crap, we screwed up.
Yeah.
Let's try to fix this. But as of now, it's Gandalf, which would mean the bad wizard Saruman, because they're rivals to the end, I guess. I
think there's so much more potential to not have it be Gandalf. Because there's nothing known about them. You could create names, you could create storylines, and it would be fine. As long as it was consistent with a character of a magic user like a Gandalf or a Sauron. As long as it was consistent with that, they could do whatever they wanted. So,
Yep.
But yeah, we'll see. So we'll see how that goes. Again, outside of a few parts here and there, this is the least interesting part of the movie or the show for me, is this stranger from season 1 into season 2. So, so that's kind of the main parts that we wanted to talk about. Anything else that you wanted to touch on as far as like storylines, characters, things like that?
Celeborn.
Okay,
Galadriel's husband.
Yeah.
We don't know where he is. We know he's alive. He's alive in Lord of the Rings. So we know he's somewhere. We don't know where that is. Yeah. Galadriel has no idea where he is. He's just,
that's weird.
Here's Middle Earth. He disappeared. Man, I'm gonna flirt with my my daughter's husband. You know what I mean? Like, who's Elrond, by the way? Read the books, okay? You'll understand the history. But there was a lot of fan fiction going on what do they call those? Speculation, yeah, going on about who Adar was, where he came from. We end up finding out that he's one of the original elves that was turned into an orc or Uruk by Morgoth. I think there's 13 or 20 of them. But my idea or thought is that Adar was Celeborn. And that when he put on the ring or whatever, it would cleanse his soul, and he would be like, "Oh my gosh, I love you," And but I was wrong. It sucked. It wasn't, and he died, which was, oh man, like all the bad guys' deaths that happened. That one did suck.
Yeah. I actually liked him. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. But we still don't know where he is or anything. So maybe we see that in the 3rd season. I don't think it actually holds any value to the story at all. It would just be cool to see where he's been and hear what's going on. I don't know.
Yeah.
If you don't know the history of Celeborn, he's like one of the most well-revered elves of the Noldor. So he is, or is he Sindarin? Gosh dang it, I can't remember. There's so many elf groups. But he's very widely respected and known, and not just some guy. Everyone would know who he is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I did like Adar as well. Thought that was interesting. Kind of the conflict between him and Sauron, as well as him and Galadriel for a couple episodes. Mm-hmm. As far as Galadriel and Elrond kissing, they built that up like, oh, there's a love story there, but I saw it as just a feint, or like a distraction. Oh, I'm going to give her a kiss. I'll slip her the ring so she can escape. Like I never, outside of that scene, I never felt that they were in love or anything. But that's just
Yeah. Agreed. I
Okay.
remember reading online all this blow up about like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, this is terrible for the story. They're complete. And I'm like, what the heck's going on? I
Yeah.
saw the scene and I'm like, this can't be more obvious.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like, this guy's obviously doing it to hand her the ring. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe that's weird, but like, if I'm going to save a loved one's life, I would probably do something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
whatever.
At worst, it's a Luke and Leia moment, but at best, it's like a, hey, I'm going to help you get out of the sticky situation.
Yeah. And in the end, they're not brother or sister or anything like that. So
Yeah.
if they kissed, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean,
It'd still work out.
Yeah, it's just weird because
Yeah.
then she's kissing his daughter's husband, but whatever. It's 2000s. People do weird things. Who knows?
Yeah. They're not blood related, right?
Yeah, they're not blood related. That's the key.
Yeah. And she's hot. So you never know. Well, what else? I think we'll see him come back in like a Gandalf coming with the army and Two Towers to save the Rohans, the Helm's Deep moment. I think we'll see something like that maybe, where he has this heroic entrance. But as far as outside of that, probably not much. They can create whatever they want with him because I don't think he's an established character, but not like he did this and he did that. And I don't think we have that information.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, so we'll see what happens, how it goes. Yeah. So I'm excited for season 3. I think it's a good move to keep going with this. And it sounds like they have the numbers. So
yeah, I think as long as the numbers stay true, I think we're going to see it go all the way to where Lord of the Rings kind of starts, right? Lord of the Rings kind of starts, about the battle and the cutting off of the ring. I think we'll go all the way to that battle if we go all the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like that. All right, so let's move on. I got my top 5 moments from season 2. These are just like specific scenes throughout the season. I would put number 5 for me is Tom Bombadil's first appearance. I was excited. Like, oh, Tom Bombadil, blah, blah. He's talking to his wife. And we don't see, and he's smart. He's curious, all that stuff. So his initial appearance, I was excited about. I think that was great. Plus, it's the first time we see him in live action. So I think it's a good moment for the season. I don't know if we'll see him again in future seasons. I'd be surprised. So I think it's a one and done. So I thought it's a great moment. Number 4, the Ents and the Entwives in the show, where they make an appearance. We didn't see them in the Lord of the Rings movies because they were lost. So we get to see them. It's kind of a nerdy thing. Like, hey, it's the Entwive. I know what those guys are. I know a little bit about their story. So it was good to see them. Good to see the Ents and just how they don't like people chopping down the trees. Don't mess around with axes in the forest. So I liked that piece. Number 3, Círdan and the Grey Havens, or Círdan. Did we decide? I think it's a hard C, right?
I think it's Círdan.
Most of them, yeah, Círdan and the Grey Havens. There's a big, I don't know how big it was, but there's complaints. Oh, he's got a beard. Elves don't have beards. Blah blah blah. I think it's whether or not they have beards. He was the oldest, so they had to first of all show that visually. But maybe he did have a beard, but he shaved it off later, so it's all good. But such an important character in the lore, so I liked seeing him and kind of what he's up to, building the ships, his power, his knowledge, all that stuff was really cool. The second, number 2, the Barrow-wights and their duel with the Elves. We missed that in the Lord of the Rings movie. Read about it in the novel, but we didn't get to see it till now. And I thought it was a really cool action sequence, very creepy and fearful. Creepy Barrow-wights, so I liked that. And then the number one top moment from season 2 is the Balrog. Durin's Bane shows up in the final episode and faces off with Durin the Third, and he gets his revenge, or he gets his man. Durin the Third is killed. But such an awesome sequence. I felt that the visual, the art design, all that matched up really well with what we see later on in Fellowship of the Ring. So I thought it was great continuity there.
Mm-hmm.
Such a cool moment. Great way to start off that episode. And for me, that's my number one moment from season 2. Any thoughts on that, Mark? Do you have anything else to add? Is there something you'd put in there that I forgot or overlooked?
Number one, I mean, that's it. I mean, come on. That part was so epic. I mean, it was great. It was almost like finally he sees or something like that. Like he sees Durin's Bane and he's like, oh my gosh, like he takes the ring off. No problem. Doesn't he? Just sets it down. It wasn't, you weren't lifting your arm up. It was just you getting stronger. Like the last words to his son, and then dies heroically. I mean, that was so epic. I mean, you can't beat that. That's the defining moment of the entire season right there.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right?
Yeah.
Great. Two other ones that I might add in there somewhere, maybe 6 and 7, maybe, somewhere in there. Celebrimbor's death. Right? Yeah. We see a Celebrimbor die. We Sauron tortures him and kills him and stuff. I think that's an important thing because of who he was, what he meant to the elves. He was the leader of Eregion. One of the leaders, right? We see one of the great leaders fall.
Yeah.
So it's an important moment, sad moment. I think that was a big moment in the history of Lord of the Rings. And then the healing of Galadriel. We see the rings get used to some effect, right? He can't heal her with one ring, but they can heal her with 2 rings, and we get to see that these rings actually, have great power to a degree that it's literally saving lives. Mm-hmm. And so I like that part because then we get to see these rings are no joke.
Yeah.
And just like Celebrimbor said, you are Lord of the Rings. So that's who Sauron is. That's the power he wields all in one with the one ring. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Some good additions for sure. Maybe I'd bump those up to 4 and 5, but definitely some good moments there. As I was thinking of my top 5, I was like, well, what about the final duel of the Siege of Eregion? I was like, nah, it's as awesome as well. I don't even know if it was awesome. It was intense and intricate and kind of a big deal. It was. I was like, it's all right.
Yeah.
I was kind of disappointed.
Yes. Scaled down from what we see, right? I'm used to seeing 17 guys come out and kill 10,000 orcs each. I'm used to seeing, even from The Hobbit, you see 500 dwarves come over the mountain and then somehow they turn into 14,000 dwarves and, continue fighting for hours. I'm used to battles like that. And we see, and so for me, it wasn't really the battle. It was the individual stories why the battle was going on.
Yeah.
And that's what made it good to me, right? Like, I don't think that it wasn't the battle that we were used to. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if you were looking for this grand battle, you will be disappointed. I think if you're looking for the story around the battle and why the battle is happening, you'll be happy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So. And didn't we see one of the Silmarils in that battle? Wasn't the statue holding one and it fell down? Or was that a different thing?
You might be right. I can't remember. I'll have to rewatch that episode now that I think about it. But I remember there was something about the Silmarils.
Yeah, I think that was one of them. Anyways, so great season overall. Good season overall. And my hot take is The Rings of Power is actually a good series, despite what the haters say. We've talked about some things we don't like, and absolutely, I don't know if despise is the right word, but we are not a fan of. But I think the overall take is it's good. You got to watch it. yeah, there's liberties here and there, but that's show business. That's media, that we're going to see those things. It's not perfect. And I think with this, the way the stories are written, and they're not complete stories for the most part. They're just, scenes or moments. And so there's no way you can create a story like you have with Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are really the only stories from Middle Earth that are completed. The rest is rough drafts or ideas or part stories or, that sort of thing, by Tolkien and J.R.R. Tolkien himself. And then his son came in and kind of edited a bunch of stuff and added some things. So you're not going to have the same level of storytelling in this series as you are with the Lord of the Rings movies and even The Hobbit. Even The Hobbit was kind of a dumbed down version story of Lord of the Rings. If you compare the two, Hobbit's very juvenile. So really it's just those three Lord of the Rings stories, movies, whatever. That's the pinnacle. And we're not going to get that again probably in any fantasy movie, much less Tolkien's works. So I think what we have in this series is really good. And I think the people that are nitpicky, fine, be nitpicky. We just were, right? But don't throw out the baby with the bathwater type idea. There's a lot of good stuff in this show.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, I think there's a lot here to offer. I mean, you can be nitpicky, elves shaving.
And some of it's warranted.
Really?
It's fine.
Yeah. So, yeah, definitely some of it's warranted. But, I mean, there is a lot of cool things in this show. We see a lot of good things. I mean, I'm one of those that get upset when you deviate too far from a story. I enjoy this show. And I know a lot of people that I work with or friends that I have that have never really been immersed into this world, and they watched it the first time and they really enjoyed it. So it's definitely worth watching. Yeah.
And I always go back to, well, Amazon also produces the Wheel of Time show. And I hate that show.
I absolutely hate that show.
And they took a lot of liberties with Wheel of Time. But so it's not even on the same level. First of all, the production value is better with Rings of Power. Probably throwing more money at it, but I feel like the writing's better. And it's more true to the source material than, say, Wheel of Time is. So I always go back to that. It's like, well, would I rather have this and have those nitpicks, or would I rather have the Wheel of Time where it's just outright its own thing? It's completely different from the books in a lot of cases. So I always go back to, well, yeah, I'd rather have Rings of Power.
Oh yeah, 100%.
So, but yeah, we'll keep watching. We'll keep talking about it as time goes on. Like I said, next year probably do some more Tolkien podcast episodes as at least I get into. I don't know where you want to go on that journey with me, Mark, and focus a little bit on Tolkien next year, throughout the year. Or
yeah, it's been a long time since I've read the stories. I mean,
me too.
I've watched the movies plenty of times. I mean, it only takes like 16 hours to watch them all, but I'd love to read them.
No big deal. Yeah. Okay. So look forward to that. Stay tuned for that. We'll also be talking more Cosmere stuff throughout the year here and there. And we're going to get on the mic again to talk Penguin at some point. That show's about to wrap up at the time of this recording. And so we're really loving that show. So stay tuned for more reviews, more discussions about all the things, right? Middle Earth, DC Comics, Star Wars had a big announcement today with they're going to pen 3 new movies, potentially 10, 11, 12 episodes, 10, 11, 12, Simon Kinberg. So we'll finally get back to talking more stuff, because I think there was a drought there for a bit for a lot of franchises. So I'm looking forward to it. But thanks guys for watching. Definitely subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment on the video. If you think we're just out there and you hate this show, let us know. I mean, I'm fine with well thought out criticism that's valid. I have no problem with that. Let's talk about it. If you like the show, let us know too, because I know you guys are out there that do like it. So, but thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And we will catch you next time on the Credible Nerds Podcast.
See you guys.